The alarm buzzed before dawn, jarring Linda awake from the kind of sleep that never felt long enough. She blinked at the dim light filtering through the blinds, then turned her head to the small twin bed beside her own. Janine was curled up, her tangled curls spilling over her pillow, her little face soft and peaceful. Linda wished she could linger, watch her daughter breathe in the quiet stillness of morning, but there was no time for that. There was never enough time. She moved quickly, dressing in the semi-darkness, smoothing down the thrift store blouse that had started fraying at the cuffs. The apartment was small, just a kitchenette and 2 bedrooms, but it was home, even if the heat rattled and the faucet leaked. She tiptoed to the fridge, pulled out a peanut butter sandwich she had packed the night before, and scrawled a note on Janine's napkin with her favorite purple marker, "You're my sunshine. Love you always, Mom." At 6:30, she slipped out the door and into the icy morning air, heading toward the bus stop. The first shift was at the diner, where she moved plates and poured coffee for businesspeople who never looked up from their phones. By midday, her feet ached, and she smelled like fried eggs and burnt toast, but there was no time to rest. The second job, a hotel housekeeping gig, started at 2. She rushed through the back entrance, grabbing a cleaning cart. Room after room, she wiped away fingerprints from glass tables, scrubbed at mysterious stains, and tucked pristine white sheets with aching hands. The work was grueling, but she couldn't afford to slow down. Each paycheck barely covered rent, groceries, and the daycare fees that let Janine stay at the after-school program until Linda could pick her up. Linda never imagined she'd be raising a child on her own. She had met Cashin in college, back when life still felt like a wide-open road filled with possibilities. He was studying architecture, she was balancing coursework with part-time jobs, and they were young, in love, and sure that nothing could touch them. When she found out she was pregnant in her junior year, she was terrified, but Cashin held her hands and promised they would figure it out together. For a while, they did. He picked up extra shifts at a design firm while she pushed through morning sickness and finals. They talked about getting married after graduation, making a home, being a family. It wasn't perfect, but they had a plan, until the plan fell apart. Cashin's dream job offer came from a firm in Seattle, thousands of miles from the life they had built. Linda had expected him to say they'd move together, but instead, he hesitated. He told her he wasn't ready to be a father, that he needed time to figure himself out. She begged him to reconsider, reminded him that they were supposed to be a team, but deep down, she knew his heart had already left. A week later, he packed his things and walked away. He sent a few checks at first, guilt money wrapped in cold formality, but he never asked about Janine. Eventually, the payments stopped, and so did any trace of him in their lives. Linda dropped out of school, taking whatever jobs she could to keep herself and Janine afloat. She waitressed, cleaned houses, and picked up overnight shifts stocking grocery store shelves. There were nights she lay awake, wondering if she had made a mistake keeping the baby, if she should have begged her parents for help, if there had been another choice. But then Janine would wake up and reach for her, her tiny fingers curling around Linda's hand, and all the doubt would disappear. No matter how hard things got, she had never regretted becoming a mother. She worked tirelessly to build a life, but no matter how many hours she put in, it always felt like they were treading water. Bills piled up, daycare costs rose, and there was never enough left over for anything beyond necessities. She hated that Janine had to grow up watching her struggle, that she couldn't provide the little luxuries other kids had, music lessons, weekend trips, a bedroom filled with toys. Still, she gave Janine all the love she had, making up for what they lacked in bedtime stories, homemade birthday cakes, and whispered promises that things would get better. But deep down, Linda feared that love might never be enough. By the time they got home every day, there was barely time for dinner and Janine was already in her pajamas, her small frame curled up on the couch with a book. Linda dropped in the couch beside her and forced a smile. "Hey, baby girl. What's tonight's story?" Janine's face lit up as she held up the book. The one about the lost princess. Linda settled beside her, the exhaustion momentarily fading. She read, her voice soft and warm, pausing to brush a stray curl from Janine's forehead. When the story ended, Janine let out a sleepy sigh. "You smell like waffles," she murmured. Linda laughed, pressing a kiss to her daughter's temple. "That's because I spent all morning making them for strangers." "Maybe one day you can make them just for me," Janine whispered, her voice drowsy. Linda swallowed the lump in her throat. "One day," she promised, tucking the blankets around her daughter. After Janine drifted off, Linda sat at the small kitchen table with her phone, scrolling through job listings. Most of them required degrees she didn't have or experience she couldn't fake. She exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. Something had to give. The next morning at the diner, while refilling a coworker's coffee, her friend Noemi slid a folded piece of paper across the counter. "Saw this online last night. Thought of you." Linda unfolded it, scanning the words. The salary made her breath hitch. It was more than both of her jobs combined. But the job description was vague, no company name, no real details, just a requirement that applicants be single mothers. "That's weird, right?" Linda asked, raising an eyebrow. Noemi shrugged. "Maybe. But you're a single mom, and you need a break." Linda hesitated. It almost seemed too good to be true. But if she didn't at least try, she'd always wonder. That night, she sat on her bed with her laptop and filled out the application. Name. Age. Work experience. Parental status. She paused at that last one, frowning at the way it was phrased. Why would that matter for a job? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she typed in "single mother to a 6-year-old girl." She hit submit. There was no harm in hoping. Linda stepped into the sleek, glass-paneled lobby and immediately felt out of place. The air smelled like expensive perfume and freshly brewed coffee, and the quiet hum of conversation echoed off marble floors. A receptionist directed her to a seating area already filled with women, mothers, just like her, all dressed in their best attempt at business casual. Some clutched folders, others fidgeted with their phones, but they all had the same wary expression. This wasn't like any job interview she had been to before. She signed in and took a seat, smoothing down the skirt she rarely wore. Across from her, a woman with tired eyes bounced a toddler on her knee, whispering reassurances as the child squirmed. Another woman to her left kept checking her watch, her foot tapping anxiously against the floor. Linda wanted to ask if anyone knew what this job actually was, but before she could, a tall woman in a navy suit appeared, clipboard in hand. She called out a name, then another, leading each woman through a pair of heavy oak doors. When Linda's name was called, she inhaled sharply and followed. The interview room was minimalist, its walls lined with frosted glass. A man in his 50s sat at the head of a long table, flanked by two other people, a younger woman in a blazer and a man with wire-rimmed glasses. They introduced themselves without offering any specifics about their roles. Linda sat, gripping her hands together in her lap, and waited for the usual questions about past experience. But the conversation veered into unexpected territory almost immediately. "Tell us about your family," the man at the head of the table said, flipping through her application. She hesitated. "It's just me and my daughter, Janine. She's 6. And her father?" Her jaw tensed. "Not in the picture." "How did that come about?" She frowned. "I'm sorry, but what does that have to do with the job?" The woman in the blazer smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We understand these questions are personal, but given the nature of the position, we need to ensure candidates are the right fit." Linda's discomfort deepened. They asked about her education, her financial history, how she disciplined her daughter. Did she believe in structure or flexibility? Was she open to alternative methods of parenting? What values did she consider most important in raising a child? Every time she tried to shift the conversation back to the actual role, they sidestepped. At this stage, the specifics of the position remain confidential, the man with glasses explained. If you advance, more details will be provided. The interview ended with a polite but vague assurance that she would be contacted if they decided to move her forward. She left the office feeling more confused than when she had arrived. This wasn't normal. 3 days later, the email came. She had been selected for a second interview. The meeting would take place in the same building, but this time with a lawyer. When she arrived, the atmosphere felt even more intense. The reception area was emptier than before, and the lawyer's office, dimly lit, furnished with dark leather and towering bookshelves, felt intimidating. A man in a tailored suit gestured for her to sit, barely looking up from a stack of papers. This interview will be focused on your financial background and legal history, he said, his tone brisk. I need you to be completely transparent. She folded her arms. I don't even know what the job is. You will, if you pass this stage. He flipped through a file, scanning the contents. You have no criminal record. No outstanding debts aside from your student loans. Your income is modest but steady. However, you've had multiple evictions over the past few years. Heat crept up her neck. I had to move when rent went up. I always paid what I could. He didn't react, just made a note. How would you describe your financial situation? Stable enough to keep a roof over my daughter's head, she said tightly. And if someone were to offer you financial security beyond what you've ever had? She stiffened. Depends on what I'd have to do to earn it. His gaze lifted from the papers, sharp and assessing. Would you consider taking in a child that isn't your own? She blinked. The question sent a shiver down her spine. What? He didn't elaborate. Would you? Her mouth felt dry. I would never take in a child for money, if that's what you're asking. The lawyer studied her, then nodded. This concludes our discussion. You'll be contacted if you advance. She left the building unsettled. As much as she needed a new job, this was beginning to feel less like an opportunity and more like an enigma she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. Over the next few days, odd things started happening. At the park, she was pushing Janine on the swings when she noticed a man sitting on a bench nearby. He had a newspaper in front of him, but every so often, his eyes flicked toward them. When Linda met his gaze, he quickly looked away. At first, she dismissed it. But later, as they walked toward the exit, she caught sight of a camera peeking out from his bag, the lens pointed straight at them. Her heart pounded. She grabbed Janine's hand and hurried away. Then, at the grocery store, she reached for a carton of milk and noticed a woman rummaging through her cart. Excuse me? Linda said, startled. The woman looked up, eyes wide with something that wasn't quite embarrassment. Oh. I thought this was mine. Sorry. She backed away quickly, disappearing into the next aisle. Linda stood frozen for a moment, staring at her cart. Nothing was missing, but the unease wouldn't leave her. That night, she double-checked that the apartment door was locked. Then she sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone, waiting for another email. Whatever she had gotten herself into, someone was watching. The elevator doors slid open to reveal a quiet, upscale corridor lined with sleek glass panels. A receptionist greeted Linda with a nod before leading her down a hallway, her heels clicking softly against the polished floors. The office was nothing like the sterile interview rooms she had sat in before. This space exuded power, floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a sweeping city skyline, an expensive-looking bar cart sat untouched in the corner, and dark wood paneling made the room feel more like a private club than a workplace. At the far end of the room, a man stood with his back to her, staring out the window. Lucien Marceau. She recognized the name immediately. He wasn't just wealthy, he was in a different league altogether. Swiss banker, billionaire investor, the kind of man whose name appeared in headlines next to phrases like record-breaking deal and exclusive clientele. He turned as the receptionist left, his sharp features unreadable, his posture controlled. "Ms. Winslow," he said smoothly, motioning for her to sit. Linda hesitated, every instinct telling her to be cautious. Nothing about this job process had made sense, and now she was sitting across from a man who had the means to employ anyone in the world. Why was he looking for a single mother with no elite background? She lowered herself into the chair, fingers curling around the arms of the seat. "I'm sure you have questions," he said, his accent subtly clipped, revealing his European upbringing. That would be an understatement. He gave a measured nod, then, without ceremony, placed a single sheet of paper in front of her. "I need someone to adopt my son." The words didn't register at first. Linda blinked, scanning the paper. "I don't," she started, then stopped. The document in front of her wasn't a job contract. It was a legal agreement. The terms were spelled out in unflinching detail. If she agreed to the arrangement, she would become the sole legal guardian of a 2-year-old boy named Elijah Marceau. In return, she would receive full financial security, property, a bank account with enough money to ensure she and Janine would never struggle again. The one condition: she could never contact Lucien again. Linda's breath caught. You want me to adopt your son?" "Yes. This isn't an interview. This is an arrangement." His expression remained unreadable. "You're correct." A sharp laugh escaped her before she could stop it. "You can't be serious." "I am." Her pulse hammered. "Why would you do this? Why wouldn't you want to raise him yourself?" Something flickered in his gaze, but his voice remained impassive. "That's not relevant." She pushed the paper back toward him. "It is to me." For the first time, there was a crack in his detached demeanor. His fingers curled slightly, his jaw tightening. "I am not the father he needs," he said. Linda scoffed. "So you're just, what? Hiring someone to love him for you?" His expression didn't change. "I have resources, but I cannot give him the life he deserves." "You can." Her stomach twisted. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." The weight of those words sent a shiver down her spine. The strange interview process, the invasive questions, the feeling of being watched, he had been evaluating her from the beginning. "I need an answer, Ms. Winslow," he said evenly. Her voice sharpened. "You expect me to decide right now?" He glanced at the clock on the wall. "You have until the end of the week." Linda shot to her feet. "This is insane." She turned toward the door, desperate to put distance between herself and this cold, calculating man, when movement in an adjacent office caught her eye. A small boy sat on the floor, playing with a toy car. His dark curls fell into his eyes, his tiny hands pushing the car back and forth in quiet concentration. He didn't look up, didn't react to the sound of her voice. There was something achingly lonely about the way he sat there, completely absorbed in the toy, as if he had learned that no one would come looking for him. Linda's chest tightened. "That's him," she whispered. Lucien didn't turn. "Yes." She swallowed hard, her emotions warring with logic. Elijah. A child who had done nothing to deserve being passed from one person to another like a business transaction. She turned back to Lucien. "You don't even say his name." His gaze remained on the window. "I need to know if you're interested." Linda's fingers curled into fists. "You're unbelievable." She stormed out. The air outside the building felt different, too crisp, too sharp. She paced the sidewalk, her hands trembling. This was more than unethical, more than reckless. She should report him. No parent should be able to buy their way out of their own child's life. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen, ready to call someone. Who, exactly, she didn't know. But before she could press a button, an image flashed through her mind. Elijah, playing alone. Linda squeezed her eyes shut. She could walk away. She could pretend this never happened. But she knew what loneliness looked like in a child. She had seen it in Janine's eyes on nights when she worked late, when her daughter asked why other kids had 2 parents at their school plays and she had none. Elijah wasn't a business deal. He was a little boy who deserved to be loved. Her stomach churned. What kind of man could abandon his own child like that? She should say no. She should hate Lucien Marceau for even asking. The first time Lucien saw Astrid, she was arguing with a street vendor in Geneva over the price of a pastry. The man had tried to overcharge her, assuming she was a clueless tourist, but Astrid stood her ground with unwavering confidence and a bright, unapologetic smile. Lucien had been watching from a nearby cafe, fascinated by her energy, by the way she laughed even as she refused to back down. When she finally won the argument and turned to leave, their eyes met, and something in her expression shifted. Amusement. Curiosity. A spark of recognition neither of them could name. They fell in love quickly, effortlessly, as if they had known each other in another life. She was everything he wasn't, spontaneous, warm, open to possibility. While Lucien analyzed risk and calculated outcomes, Astrid believed in instinct, in following whatever made her heart beat faster. He had spent his life chasing stability, and yet with her, chaos felt like the only thing that made sense. Their wedding was small, just a few friends and family on the shores of Lake Como. Lucien had wanted something grand, a lavish affair worthy of the woman he adored, but Astrid had shaken her head, laughing as she laced her fingers through his. "I don't need an audience," she had whispered. "I just need you." For years, they were happy. Lucien worked long hours at the bank, managing investments and securing the kind of wealth that would last for generations, but Astrid never complained. She filled their home with life, with music, with half-finished art projects and impromptu dinner parties. When she told him she was pregnant, he had felt something unfamiliar, a weightless kind of joy, a sense that maybe, just maybe, he could have it all. Elijah was born on a warm spring morning, his tiny fists curled, his cries loud and insistent. Lucien had never been afraid of anything in his life, but holding his son for the first time, he had felt something close to terror. This small, fragile person was entirely dependent on him. Astrid had been a natural, rocking Elijah against her chest, humming soft lullabies. Lucien, on the other hand, approached fatherhood the way he approached everything else, with cautious strategy. He read books, consulted experts, tried to prepare. But nothing had prepared him for the way his son would look at him, uncertain, hesitant, as if already sensing the distance between them. His career pulled him away more often than he wanted. Business trips stretched longer, meetings ran late, and before he knew it, weeks passed in a blur of airports and hotel rooms. Astrid never accused him of choosing work over their family, but he could see the disappointment in her eyes. "He needs you, Lucien," she had said one evening, cradling Elijah in her arms. "Not just on weekends. Not just in pictures." He promised her he would do better. And maybe he would have. But then she was gone. A car accident on a rainy afternoon. A sudden impact, a call he never expected, a world that shattered in an instant. Lucien had no idea how to be a single father. He tried. He really did. But Elijah barely looked at him, barely recognized his voice. He clung to the nanny, to the familiar presence of someone who had always been there, while Lucien stood in the doorway, an outsider in his own home. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and futile attempts to comfort a grieving toddler who had already decided that his father was a stranger. Lucien hired nannies, one after another, searching for someone who could bridge the gap between him and his son. But Elijah rejected them all. He would wail when they tried to hold him, retreat into silence when they coaxed him to play. Lucien wanted to believe it would change, that time would fix what had been broken, but deep down, he knew better. He wasn't what Elijah needed. He was a man who understood numbers and contracts, not bedtime stories and scraped knees. One evening, as he watched Elijah sitting alone in the nursery, his small body curled around a stuffed bear Astrid had bought, Lucien made a decision. The best thing he could do, the only thing, was step aside. Elijah needed a mother. Someone who could give him warmth, patience, unconditional love. Lucien could ensure his financial security, but he could never be what his son needed most. That was why he had done what he did. Why he had searched for a single mother instead of a professional caregiver. Why he had chosen someone who knew what it was like to struggle, to fight for a child's happiness. It was not abandonment, he told himself. It was a calculated choice, the best possible outcome. And yet, as he stared at the signed documents, he felt something close to regret. Across the city, Linda sat awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. She had spent the past 3 nights weighing the impossible decision in front of her. The logical part of her mind screamed that this was wrong, that no child should be handed off like a business transaction. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Elijah, sitting alone in that office, his small hands pushing a toy car back and forth in quiet resignation. If she walked away, what would happen to him? Would Lucien find someone else? Would he change his mind and try to be a father again? Or would Elijah grow up feeling unwanted? She thought about Janine. How much she had fought to make her daughter feel loved, even when the world seemed determined to take everything from them. She knew what it was like to be left behind, to feel like someone else's inconvenience. Elijah deserved better. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she typed out a message. Her answer was yes. The first few weeks with Elijah were exhausting in ways Linda hadn't expected. He was small for his age, quiet, and wary of sudden movements. He barely ate, barely spoke, and cried at night in a way that made her heart ache. She had been prepared for an adjustment period, but nothing could have braced her for the way he refused to look at her, how his little hands would clutch the edges of his blanket, his body curling inward as if trying to disappear. She didn't push. She simply showed up, every single day, in every single way she could. She sat on the floor with him, built towers out of blocks and let him knock them over. She sang while cooking, hoping he would absorb the warmth in her voice. When he woke up crying, she rubbed circles on his back until he drifted off again. Slowly, the walls he had built around himself started to crack. One afternoon, Janine sat on the couch coloring, and Elijah hesitated before climbing up beside her. He didn't speak, just picked up a crayon and started filling in the empty spaces on her page. Janine, without missing a beat, slid another crayon toward him. They sat there, side by side, filling a world with color. The moments came in increments, tiny, fragile steps forward. A small hand slipping into hers when crossing the street. A quiet giggle during bath time. A whispered night as she turned off the lights. But there were setbacks too. Some days he would stare at the door for long stretches of time, his brows furrowed, as if waiting for someone to come through it. Other times, he would clutch one of his stuffed animals and whisper, "Daddy," so softly it nearly shattered her. She never knew what to say. She could have told him the truth, that his father had given him away with all the efficiency of signing a business contract. But the words never came. Instead, she held him close, told him he was loved, and let the silence carry the weight of what neither of them could change. As the months passed, his questions about Lucien became less frequent. Eventually, they stopped altogether. The financial security changed everything. For the first time in years, Linda wasn't stretching every dollar to the breaking point. The weight she had carried for so long began to lift. She had always dreamed of running her own cafe, a space where people could gather over warm drinks and good conversation. With the stability she had been given, she found a small corner space downtown, tucked between a bookstore and a florist. She painted the walls in soft, welcoming colors and spent hours picking out furniture that made the space feel like home. Janine insisted on naming it, and after much deliberation, they settled on Sun and Spoon. Mornings were filled with the scent of fresh pastries and the quiet hum of conversation. Customers lingered over cups of coffee, and the shelves near the window were lined with books that people could borrow. Janine helped pick out decorations, and Elijah, still small but growing bolder, had a special stool behind the counter where he would sit and watch, his eyes following every movement. Owning the cafe meant Linda could control her own hours, which meant more time with her children. They had dinners together, took weekend trips to the farmer's market, built forts in the living room on rainy days. It was the kind of life she had always wanted to give them, one where they didn't just survive, they thrived. But no matter how much things improved, there was something she couldn't shake. At the park, she felt eyes on her. A figure in the distance, someone lingering just a little too long. At first, she thought she was imagining it. But then it happened again. One afternoon, while pushing Elijah on the swing, she caught sight of a man in a gray coat standing near the trees. He wasn't close enough to be intrusive, but he wasn't blending in either. His posture was too stiff, his gaze too fixed. She turned away for a moment, just long enough to scoop Janine onto her lap. When she looked back, he was gone. It happened at the grocery store, too. A woman, seemingly focused on the produce, glancing over every so often. Linda tried to dismiss it. She had spent years worrying about money, about Janine's well-being, about keeping a roof over their heads. Maybe now that those burdens had lifted, her mind had decided to create new ones. Or maybe Lucien Marceau wasn't as detached as he had claimed to be. Elijah had always been a healthy child. A little quiet, a little more thoughtful than other kids his age, but strong. Linda had watched him grow from a cautious toddler into a bright 10-year-old who climbed trees, raced Janine across the park, and made up elaborate stories about the monsters that lived under their cafe storage shelves. She had let herself believe that their life had settled, that whatever ghosts still lingered from the past would stay there. Then, everything changed. It started with fatigue. Elijah, usually full of energy, started complaining that his legs felt heavy, that walking up the stairs made his head spin. At first, Linda thought it was nothing, maybe he was growing, maybe he wasn't drinking enough water. But then he stopped eating as much. His face lost its color. And one morning, as he reached for his glass of milk at the breakfast table, his hand trembled so badly that the cup slipped from his grasp and shattered on the floor. She rushed him to the doctor, telling herself it was something minor, something that could be fixed with rest and vitamins. But when the doctor's face grew serious after the blood work came back, her stomach twisted. "It's a rare blood disorder," the doctor explained gently, sliding a sheet of results toward her. "Not life-threatening on its own, but it's progressed to the point where he needs a bone marrow transplant." The words made no sense. Elijah was fine. He had to be fine. "We've tested for matches in the registry," the doctor continued, "but so far, nothing. His best chance is a biological parent." The room tilted. Linda had known this day might come, in some form. She had accepted a contract years ago that promised a clean break, but Elijah wasn't a contract. He was a child, her child, and she would burn every legal document in the world before she let it stop her from saving him. She contacted Lucien's lawyer immediately. The response was swift and as cold as she expected. "Mr. Marceau is not to be contacted under any circumstances," the voice on the phone stated. "The agreement you signed explicitly forbids." Linda cut them off. "I don't care about the contract. I'm afraid." "No," she snapped. "You listen to me. My son is sick. The boy he walked away from is sick. And if Lucien Marceau has one shred of humanity in him, he will get tested. I am not asking. There was a pause, just long enough to make her wonder if she had been hung up on. Then, a clipped, reluctant, "I'll pass along the request." It wasn't a yes. But it wasn't a no, either. Days stretched into a week, the waiting unbearable. Elijah stayed in the hospital, hooked up 2 and 4, his usually bright eyes dulled by exhaustion. Janine stayed close, holding his hand, reading aloud from his favorite books. Linda hardly left his side, half sleeping in the uncomfortable chair by his bed, pretending she didn't notice how much weight he was losing. Then, a message from the lawyer. Mr. Marceau has agreed to donate. Anonymously. Linda didn't care about the conditions. He could hide behind his money and his contracts all he wanted, so long as Elijah got better. The procedure was scheduled within days. Lucien arrived at the hospital under strict privacy arrangements, his name absent from any official paperwork. Linda didn't see him. She didn't want to see him. The doctors assured her the process went smoothly. Elijah would have a long recovery, but his chances were good. It should have ended there. But it didn't. She had gone down to the cafeteria for coffee, just for a moment, just long enough to stretch her legs and pretend she wasn't coming apart at the seams. When she returned, she found Lucien in Elijah's hospital room. She froze in the doorway, heart slamming against her ribs. He was seated at the edge of the bed, his hands gripping the rail like it was the only thing keeping him upright. His face, always so composed, was wrecked with something raw, something close to agony. Elijah was awake but drowsy, his gaze shifting between Lucien and Linda in confusion. "Who?" Elijah's voice was weak, barely above a whisper. Lucien inhaled sharply, his grip tightening. His face crumpled. And then, without warning, he reached for Elijah, pulling him into his arms. Linda's breath caught. She had never seen Lucien Marceau show emotion, never seen his polished, detached mask slip. But here he was, breaking apart in the quiet of a hospital room, clutching the child he had once given away, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Elijah, still groggy, blinked against his shirt. His small hands gripped the fabric weakly, uncertain but instinctive, like a child reaching for something familiar even when they couldn't place why. Linda stepped forward, voice sharp. "What do you think you're doing?" Lucien didn't answer. He held on to Elijah like he was afraid to let go, his expression shattered in a way she had never imagined possible. Elijah turned to her, his face scrunched in sleepy confusion. "Mom?" Linda swallowed hard, every emotion warring inside her. She placed a gentle hand on Elijah's back, her gaze never leaving Lucien. "Get out," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Lucien finally looked at her. His eyes, usually cold and unreadable, were red-rimmed, desperate. But desperation didn't undo the years of silence. She repeated, sharper this time, "Get out." He hesitated, one last look at Elijah, then let go. The room felt colder as he left. Elijah shifted against his pillow, eyes drooping again. "Who was that?" Linda brushed a hand over his hair. "No one you need to worry about." Elijah, too tired to press, closed his eyes. His breathing slowed, steady and safe. Linda sat beside him, gripping his hand in hers. Her son was going to be okay. That was all that mattered. And as for Lucien Marceau? She wasn't done with him yet. Linda sat in the high-rise law office, arms crossed, back rigid. The city stretched out behind the floor-to-ceiling windows, but she wasn't interested in the view. Across the polished conference table sat Lucien Marceau, as composed as ever, his sharp suit and controlled expression making it seem as though the scene in the hospital had never happened. But she had seen the cracks. She had seen him break, holding the son he had abandoned. And now he was here, asking for something she wasn't sure she could give. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and an expensive watch, cleared his throat. Mr. Marceau has requested an amendment to the original agreement. Linda let out a sharp breath. An amendment? She turned to Lucien, eyes flashing. You mean another contract to decide when you'll care about your son? His jaw tightened. I've made mistakes. She scoffed. That's an understatement. I want to be in his life, he said, voice steady but low. I can't undo the past. But I can do better now. Linda leaned forward. And what happens when things get complicated? When your work pulls you away? When Elijah starts trusting you, only for you to disappear again? His eyes darkened. That won't happen. She let out a bitter laugh. Oh, right. Because you say so? The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. If we could keep this civil. Linda cut him off. This isn't about legal terms. This is about a child. You don't get to decide when you care. You don't get to drop in because it suits you. Lucien exhaled slowly, his fingers curling into fists against his thighs. I know I don't deserve your trust. But I won't disappear again. Linda wanted to believe him. She wanted to hold on to the anger, to tell him no, to make him feel the weight of what he had done. But that wasn't what this was about. Elijah had been through enough. He had nearly lost his life, and the man sitting across from her had given him a second chance, even if it had taken too long. That mattered. Not for her, but for Elijah. She let out a slow breath, forcing herself to push past the resentment. Elijah deserves honesty. He deserves stability. If you're in, you're in. No half measures. Lucien nodded. I agree. Linda studied him, searching for hesitation, but there was none. Just determination, something raw beneath the polished exterior. The lawyer slid a document toward them. If you both agree, we can put everything in writing. She barely glanced at the contract before pushing it away. We are not finished with the terms. We have to do this on his terms. When Elijah is ready and after fully recovered. Lucien nodded again. When he's ready and after he is fully recovered. And that's not enough. Her eyes locked onto his, unflinching. Elijah gets to decide how this goes. You don't just drop in when it's convenient. You show up consistently, or not at all. The lawyer nodded, scribbling notes. We can draft a document allowing flexibility while ensuring regular involvement. And Janine, Linda interrupted. She's part of this too. Lucien frowned. She's not my. She's Elijah's sister, Linda snapped. She's grown up knowing him as her brother. You coming in changes everything for both of them. I won't let you mess with one child's life while ignoring the other. Lucien exhaled slowly, his gaze flickering with something unreadable. Then, finally, he nodded. I understand. The resolution was a compromise. The contract would outline Lucien's role in Elijah's life, leaving room for adjustment based on what Elijah was comfortable with. And though he had no legal ties to Janine, there was an agreement. If he was present at important moments for Elijah, Janine would not be left out. No separation. No half measures. Linda didn't trust easily, not with this. But as Lucien signed his name on the dotted line, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this would be different. Elijah's recovery was slow but steady. After weeks in the hospital, he was finally able to come home, where the routine of their life began to settle again. School drop-offs, breakfasts at the cafe, Janine's giggles filling the apartment. One night, after a happy routine day, Linda sat beside him on his bed. She smoothed his blanket, then took a breath. There's something we need to talk about. Elijah's eyes flickered with curiosity. What? She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. You remember the man who visited you at the hospital? Elijah frowned slightly. The one who was crying? Linda nodded. His name is Lucien. She paused. He's your father. Elijah blinked, processing. His small hands twisted the edge of his blanket. My real dad? She forced a small smile. You are my real son. That's never changed. But yes, he's the man who, she stopped herself. No child needed to hear he's the man who walked away. Elijah stared at his lap. Why did he leave? Linda's throat tightened. That's something only he can explain. But he wants to see you. If you want to see him. Elijah didn't answer right away. She gave him time, let him sort through whatever thoughts were turning in his head. Finally, he fell asleep. Routine continued as always. But Elijah was different now, quieter in moments where he used to be carefree, thoughtful in ways that made Linda's heart ache. She gave him space, waiting until he was ready. One evening, long after Janine had gone to bed, he padded into the kitchen, his bare feet barely making a sound against the floor. Mom? His voice was small, uncertain. She set her mug down. What is it, sweetheart? Elijah hesitated, eyes fixed on the swirling steam of her tea. Can I ask you something? Always. He climbed onto the stool across from her, fiddling with the hem of his pajama shirt. Why didn't he want me? Linda felt the words like a punch to the gut. She reached for his hands, folding them into hers. Elijah, this was never about you. You are so loved. He made a mistake, a huge one. But that doesn't mean you weren't wanted. Elijah frowned. Then why did he leave? She took a steady breath. Because he thought you deserved better than what he could give you. He was wrong, but I think he's starting to see that now. Elijah looked down, absorbing her words. After a long silence, he whispered, So, what happens now? Linda squeezed his hands. That's up to you. Elijah met her gaze, something unreadable in his expression. I think I want to meet him. Linda nodded, reaching for his hand. Then we'll start there. A week later, Linda took Elijah to the park. The air was crisp, the scent of autumn leaves filling the space between them as they approached the open field. Lucien was already there, standing near a bench, looking out of place in his tailored coat. He turned at the sound of their footsteps, his face unreadable. Elijah hesitated at Linda's side, watching Lucien like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Linda crouched beside him, keeping her voice soft. It's just a conversation, sweetheart. You're in control. Elijah nodded, then squared his shoulders. He took a few steps forward, stopping just a few feet away. Hi. Lucien's throat bobbed. Hi. There was a pause, a moment where neither of them seemed to know what came next. Then Elijah's brow furrowed. Do you know how to play soccer? Lucien exhaled, something close to relief flickering across his face. I think I can figure it out. Elijah nodded, turning toward the open field. Okay. Lucien followed. Later that evening, over dinner, Linda tried to keep her voice casual. So, what did you think? Elijah shrugged, poking at his mashed potatoes. He's okay, I guess. Janine, who had been unusually quiet through the meal, piped up. Is he gonna be around more? Linda glanced between them, carefully measuring her words. That depends. Would you want to see him again? Elijah considered, chewing slowly, before finally nodding. Yeah. I think I do. Lucien showed up. Every single time. Linda had braced herself for disappointment, for another heartbreak Elijah didn't deserve. But it never came. On Wednesday afternoons, he stood at the edge of the soccer field, hands in his pockets, watching intently as Elijah sprinted across the grass. At first, Elijah barely acknowledged him. He played like he always had, glancing toward Linda on the bleachers but never toward the man by the fence. Lucien never forced it. He just stayed. One afternoon, after a particularly hard game, Elijah trudged off the field, frustrated. His team had lost, and he had missed a goal he should have made. Linda was about to call him over, to tell him one game didn't define him, but before she could, Lucien crouched beside him. "Tough match," he said. Elijah wiped sweat from his forehead and nodded. "You want to talk about it?" Elijah kicked at a loose clump of dirt, then mumbled, "I should have made that last shot." Lucien nodded. "Maybe. Or maybe their goalie was just faster than you expected." Elijah looked up, his frown easing slightly. "You think?" "I know," Lucien said. "Sometimes, even when you do everything right, it doesn't go your way." He hesitated, then added, "Doesn't mean you stop trying." Elijah didn't answer right away. But later, when they were leaving, he muttered, "See you next game," before jogging toward Linda's car. Lucien stayed frozen for a moment before nodding, the smallest hint of relief in his eyes. It was the first real crack in the wall between them. At home, things weren't much different, except now, Elijah mentioned Lucien in passing. Not often, not with deep emotion, but he was there, existing in their world in a way he hadn't before. One evening, Janine perched on a stool in the cafe, watching Lucien and Elijah play a quiet game of chess near the window. "He's not as scary as I thought," she said, twirling her spoon in her hot chocolate. Linda smirked. "You thought he was scary?" Janine shrugged. "He always looks serious. Like one of those guys in movies who wears sunglasses all the time." Linda laughed. "You're not wrong." Janine leaned her chin on her palm, watching as Elijah hesitated over his next move. "Do you think he's gonna stay this time?" Linda swallowed. She wanted to say yes, but she had learned long ago that promises were dangerous things. "I think he's trying," she said. Janine studied her brother, then Lucien. "Good." Lucien's presence didn't just change things for Elijah. It changed things for all of them. When parent-teacher conferences rolled around, Linda was surprised to find him already seated in the hallway, reviewing a school brochure as if he were analyzing an investment portfolio. "You didn't have to come," she said as she sat beside him. He looked up. "Yes, I did." Linda didn't argue. Inside, Elijah's teacher beamed as she spoke about his improvement in class, how he was more engaged, more confident. She handed them a math test with a bright red A circled at the top. Elijah would never brag about it, but Lucien turned to Linda, eyebrows raised. "That's impressive." She smiled. "He's a smart kid." Lucien stared at the paper for a long moment, then carefully folded it and slipped it into his pocket. The holidays were the next big hurdle. Thanksgiving had always been a quiet affair, Linda, Janine, Elijah, and whatever meal she could throw together between shifts. This time, it was different. Lucien showed up at her apartment with groceries, insisting he wanted to contribute. She had been reluctant at first, but when she saw how carefully he followed Janine's instructions for mashed potatoes, she let him stay. Elijah watched from the doorway, arms crossed, amusement flickering in his eyes. "You're doing it wrong," he finally said. Lucien glanced up. "Oh. You have to mash it harder, or it gets lumpy." Lucien frowned at the pot. "Janine didn't mention that." Janine grinned. "I like watching you mess up." Linda snorted. Lucien sighed, then handed Elijah the masher. "Fine. Show me how it's done." Elijah rolled his eyes, but he stepped forward and took over. The three of them stood side by side in the kitchen, Elijah mashing potatoes, Janine sneaking marshmallows meant for the sweet potatoes, Lucien reading the recipe like his life depended on it. It was messy, chaotic, imperfect. It was good. Then came the biggest surprise of all. Elijah had mentioned once, just once, that he had never seen the ocean. The next thing Linda knew, Lucien was proposing a trip. Nothing elaborate, he insisted. Just a weekend. Linda had hesitated. It was one thing to share school events and holidays. It was another to vacation together. But Elijah had been so excited. So, they went. The air smelled like salt and sun, and the waves rushed against the shore as Janine raced ahead, kicking up sand. Elijah stood at the edge of the water, hesitant. Lucien stepped beside him. Cold? Elijah shook his head. Just, big. Lucien nodded. Yeah. Elijah glanced at him. Did you ever go to the beach when you were little? Lucien hesitated, then smiled faintly. Not much. Elijah considered that. Then, without another word, he kicked off his shoes and ran into the waves. Lucien stood there for a long moment before following. The final shift came at the school award ceremony. Linda sat beside Lucien in the packed auditorium, glancing at him as the principal read off names. He looked out of place, too put together for the crowd of fidgeting parents, but there was something softer in his expression. Elijah's name was called for academic achievement. Lucien clapped before anyone else. Elijah accepted the certificate, then turned, scanning the crowd. His eyes flicked to Linda, then to Lucien. He hesitated, just for a second. Then he smiled. That night at dinner, Linda casually asked, "So, what did you think?" Elijah shrugged. It was cool. Janine nudged him. You liked it. Elijah huffed but didn't argue. Linda met his gaze. Would you want to see him again? Elijah pushed his peas around his plate, then nodded. Yeah, he said. I think I would. And just like that, their family, messy, unconventional, completely unexpected, became something real.